1 month since the Taliban took over. What has changed? We have a live report from Kabul. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea says it's fired 2 ballistic missiles into the East Sea. And the UN denies claims of Tigray rebels hiding in refugee camps in Sudan. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, MTN gives Ugandans access to sell and buy stocks from their cell phones. And in sports, Cristiano Ronaldo's Manchester United fall to young boys in the UEFA Champions League. Wednesday marks 1 month since the Taliban seized Kabul. The group is facing daunting challenges as it seeks to convert its military victory into a durable peacetime government. Afghanistan has experienced 4 decades of war, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of people. Even so, the security situation is now considered relatively stable. The country's economy is, however, in ruins, despite hundreds of billions of dollars in development spending over the past 20 years. Droughts and famine are driving thousands from the countryside to the cities. The World Food Programme fears food could run out by the end of this month, pushing 14 million people to the brink of starvation. Well, let's now hear what residents of Kabul have to say about the Taliban 1 month on.
Ever since the Mujahideen came into power, no one has had any complaints. In fact, a whole lot of problems have been sorted out and people are very satisfied.
God knows a great change has come. I am a bit upset about one thing. It is true that we had a great banking system. May God help us to revive that system. But I am happy because there is peace everywhere.
Well, let's now cross to Zamarialai Abbasan. He's live in Kabul for more on this. Zamarialai, we know, of course, that you've been covering the Taliban's rise to power almost daily for the past month. Tell us from your perspective how life has changed in Kabul.
Hello, Lindy. With its change in many aspects, and it was all dramatical changes in the country. On 15th of August, the Taliban even hadn't entered to Kabul city when the city collapsed to them. And the president already fled with several individuals of his team. And also the Taliban entered at the evening and Kabul city was in total vacuum of power. And there was no one till the Taliban said because of the looting and also other things that were happening, and opportunists were on the scene, so that they entered the city. Otherwise, it was not supposed to be this way. In the same time, the evacuation process, full of chaos and catastrophe, started at Kabul airport and ended on 30th of August. And the Taliban also announced their government on the 1st of September till 7th. The Taliban started offensive over Panjshir Valley, and it also collapsed to the Taliban. The interim government of the Taliban announced at the same time it's now a week or more than that, and this is not complete yet. The humanitarian catastrophe started looming, and also the humanitarian crisis in the country is on its higher level now. And that was what every single thing made very dramatic, and the people felt a lot of chaos, panic, and fears of Taliban, of the economic collapse and social undisciplined situation, and many more happened. And that was just a month. It means 2 decades pages were ruled in just 1 month. And Afghanistan is totally changed now. It's fully under control of the Taliban, and the Taliban are all over ruling the country. Whether the security situation is far better, but when you ask everybody in the country, they will just complain about the economic and financial issues and the looming humanitarian crisis all around.
Well,
Lindy.
Zamari Lai, let's talk more about that humanitarian crisis. It is something that, of course, the United Nations is very concerned about. Can you describe for us what the situation is like on the ground from that humanitarian perspective?
When it comes to capital Kabul, because it's a big city of 6 million people, so there were everything ready, and the people first of all thank because of the situation that came up. At least it fell without a bullet shot between two sides, the NDSF or the former government and the Taliban, and that's why this is the only thing that they are happy about. But now they are all complaining about the unemployment, the financial looming situation in the country, and the catastrophe of the economic situation all around the country is covering the mindsets of Afghan people, and they are in full panic now because of the financial issues. The banks were closed for many time, and still there is a limited access to the banks, and many people, they have money but they lack the cash because the banks will not allow more than $200 per week, and that's what still happening. The Taliban say they will control the situation, but it seems like still be happening. And the UN already announced $1.1 billion in the donor countries in the country, and that's again an era the UN stepping up to Afghanistan, and their representative already reached Afghanistan to help the Afghan people, particularly the disabled, which are more than 3 million in the country, and also floods of refugees or to the neighboring countries, mainly Pakistan and Iran. So this is the last situation, and it increases every day past.
Well, thank you so much for that update. Zamari Lai Abbasan live for us there in Kabul. Staying with this story, Chinese ambassador to Afghanistan, Wang Yu, has met with the acting foreign minister of the Afghan interim government, Amir Khan Muttaqi, in Kabul. Wang expressed appreciation for the efforts of the Afghan side to ensure the safety of Chinese citizens. He said China respects the sovereignty, independence and the territorial integrity of Afghanistan and supports the Afghan people's desire to choose their own development path. The ambassador said China is ready to provide vaccines and humanitarian supplies and help Afghanistan fight terrorism. Muttaqi called China a friendly neighbor and said he hopes that Afghanistan could improve its governance capacity to better fight terrorism. He added Afghanistan will never allow any force to use its territory to harm the interests of China and other countries. Now, as of April 2020, at least 47,000 Afghan civilians had been killed in the US-led war in Afghanistan, and more than 10 million Afghans had been displaced. Jiang Duan is the minister of the Chinese mission to the UN in Geneva. And on Tuesday, he delivered a joint statement on behalf of a group of countries at the 48th session of the UN Human Rights Council. He said the military intervention of the US and its allies is the main cause of large-scale human rights violations in Afghanistan, and he called on these countries to take responsibility for their actions.
The crimes committed in Afghanistan by military personnel of the US and its allies, such as killing of civilians and torture, must be thoroughly and impartially investigated. The perpetrators must be brought to justice, and victims deserve justice and remedy. The countries in question must be held accountable for what they have done in the past 20 years. They have the obligation to fulfill the commitment to Afghanistan's peaceful reconstruction, rather than simply walking away and shifting the burden to the international community.
Let's turn to news from South Sudan now. More than 20 soldiers have been killed in clashes between forces loyal to South Sudan's Vice President Riek Machar and a splinter group in the northern part of the country. Riek Machar's forces split into two last month when a group of generals claimed to have ousted him. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
The latest clashes in Magenis in Upper Nile State began on Sunday. Each side is accusing the other of starting the violence. Both groups are vowing to continue fighting because each of them claims to be fighting in self-defense. The violence is threatening to derail the implementation of a peace deal signed 3 years ago. It is that peace deal that brought opposition leader Riek Machar as vice president in the current government, the East African regional body that brokered the 2018 peace agreement. The Intergovernmental Authority on Development, or IGAD, says it is concerned about the clashes. IGAD is urging the rivaling groups to resolve their differences by dialogue. Riek Machar's forces split into two last month when a group of generals claimed to have removed him as head of the army and party. Mr. Machar called the move by the generals illegal. Violence is now resulting from the disagreement. Patrick Poyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Guinea's military junta, led by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, is holding talks with foreign diplomats today. The talks at the presidential palace in Conakry will focus on the formation of a new government and a roadmap towards civilian rule. The junta is also expected to hold a separate meeting with representatives of civil society and Ghanaians in the diaspora. These consultations are part of a 4-day series of meetings about the West African nation's future. The dialogue kicked off on Tuesday with the military leaders meeting with officials from the party of opposition leader Sello Dalien Diallo. Well, since September 5th, news in Guinea has been dominated by the military coup that overthrew President Alpha Condé. CGTN's Joy Kiruki Juma now takes a look at how local and international media outlets have covered the developing situation. Here's Joy with more on that.
Sunday, September 5. Another coup in Africa was unfolding in Guinea. President Alpha Condé had been deposed and arrested by a group of soldiers. They were led by Lieutenant Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya. For one local media group, it was time to reorganize its programming and position itself to inform its local audience on the emerging situation.
As soon as we learned they were shooting in the vicinity of the presidential palace, we put a team on alert. We were receiving conflicting information initially about the president. Some people said he was doing very well, while others said he was already captured. Our teams later hit the streets to cover the celebrations.
Radio station FIM commands a respectable number of listeners in Guinea. As the reality of the coup came to the fore, the editorial team also took the necessary steps to capture the moment.
Our teams are always on the alert for the current situation, but beyond that, we have an editorial board that functions in the normal way as in all media houses. We meet every morning and discuss the news. Depending on the topic selected, we deploy our reporters in the field. We also have a watchdog team that goes around to other media outlets to follow what's happening in other places.
In Guinea, the relationship between the media and military has always been tense when covering sensitive events. However, things were different in this case.
Bon, c'était très facile. Moi, j'ai reçu un coup d'appel très tôt le matin.
While on my way to Conakry, I received a video in which the special forces announced that they had taken power. Afterwards, I received images of President Alpha Condé on WhatsApp. But how could I verify this information as a journalist? I called everywhere and someone gave me Colonel Doumbouya's number, which I tried to reach in vain. So I decided to leave him a message via WhatsApp, and he called me back later and confirmed that he is the new president.
We're not encountering any challenges on the ground. From the first day of the coup, we deployed reporters who gave us the first reactions to the event. It must be said that the current junta is different from the one we knew in 2008. It is less talkative, very organized.
The media in Guinea say they are counting on the good collaboration of the junta to be able to relay developments in the country. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
In the 4 decades between 1960 and 2000, there were on average 4 coup attempts on the African continent per year. That figure dropped over the past 2 decades, but recent events have many worried about a resurgence. CGTN's Robert Nagila has that report.
It's been an eventful 11 months for Africa. In that time, there have been 3 successful coups. 2 of them in Mali in August 2020 and May 2021. And just last week, President Alpha Condé of Guinea was deposed from power. Meanwhile, in Chad, the military seized power in April this year following the death of President Idriss Déby.
We've all seen this before.
Security expert David Otto Endely says reliance on security forces to govern in place of democratic institutions is part of the problem.
As long as African democratic systems, do not rely on the democratic institutions, but rather on the military, rather on the force of the police and all these special forces, then we will continuously see a situation where the same military that they rely on will be the same ones to overthrow them.
In a continent with the youngest population globally, it is also the least developed despite being resource-rich. Worryingly for Africa, 7 countries are in this year's top 10 Fragile States Index, with Somalia, South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo in the top 5. But not everyone thinks there's a cause for concern.
I am one of those few people who are not so alarmed by these.
Security analyst Paul Handy says coups are usually a symptom of bad governance, but also part of the process of nation building.
This is part of state building in Africa. This is part of a process that is lengthy, that is not linear, that is difficult, and of course also violent.
He says the solution to coups not only lies in strengthening democratic institutions, but also empowering a country's civil society.
Strengthening civil societies is also is actually the most sustainable way of making sure that participation at a broader scale is ensured, participation to the political, but also to the economic and social processes. But also, whoever is in power is also held accountable.
Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Let's take a short break now. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea says it's fired 2 ballistic missiles into the East Sea. And Uganda temporarily closes a prison in its eastern city of Soroti after 34 inmates test positive for COVID-19. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. Let's start with news from the Korean Peninsula. The South Korean military says Pyongyang fired 2 ballistic missiles into the East Sea just hours ago. Shane Ham has more from Seoul.
South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff announcing just a couple of hours ago that it detected 2 unidentified projectiles fired off into waters east of the Korean Peninsula. We now know that these are believed to have indeed been 2 short-range ballistic missiles launched from a central inland part of the country. Now, this, of course, comes just 2 days after the DPRK announced that it had test-fired a long-range cruise missile this past weekend. Of course, this latest missile test would be the first ballistic test since late March. There have been several other short-range tests conducted this year, including one back in late January, just after U.S. President Joe Biden was inaugurated. Now, military officials here say they're working closely with U.S. intelligence to analyze the exact details, including the range and trajectory of this short-range ballistic missile. Those results are thought to come out in the next couple of days or possibly weeks, but this latest test, if it's indeed a ballistic missile launch, it would be in direct violation of UN sanctions currently imposed on the DPRK. Japan's Coast Guard confirming that a projectile indeed landed outside its exclusive economic zone, or EEZ. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga condemned the launch. He called it, quote, outrageous. Now, both Mr. Suga and South Korean President Moon Jae-in convened emergency sessions of their respective national security councils to discuss the latest developments. The latest, of course, comes amid a stalemate in nuclear talks. And it just so happens that Chinese Foreign Minister Mr. Wang Yi is here in Seoul at the moment, where he held talks with his South Korean counterpart this morning and also paid a visit to South Korean President Moon. Also, remember, there have been reports recently that the DPRK has reactivated a plutonium reactor at its main nuclear complex, and this also comes just a couple of weeks after South Korea and the U.S. concluded their annual joint military drills. So it'll be interesting to see how this latest development will affect situations here and whether it will lead to bringing relevant parties back to the negotiating table to prevent any further escalation in tensions and getting us any closer to resolving the denuclearization issue.
A ceremony has been held in New York to open the 76th United Nations General Assembly. The new president of the General Assembly, Abdullah Shahid, says addressing coronavirus vaccine inequality and climate change are among the top priorities for the year ahead. He said the theme of his presidency will be to restore hope. Sarah Walton has this report.
Delegates from the 193 member states of the United Nations gathered in the General Assembly Hall at the UN headquarters in New York on Tuesday afternoon to watch a ceremony to mark the closure of their 75th session. The Secretary General praised the work of the body, saying it had taken on challenges such as COVID-19 and climate change, while often being unable to meet in person because of the pandemic. There was then another ceremony, this time to open the 76th session of the General Assembly. Its new president was also officially sworn in. Abdullah Shahid is the Foreign Minister of the Maldives, and in his first address in the role, he said it had been an incredibly challenging 18 months for the UN, but that he is embracing the theme of hope for his presidency.
Hope is what drives us not to give up, even when the odds seem high. We place our hope in humanity because at the end of the day, that is all there is. We are 7 billion people on this planet. All we have is our common humanity. All we have is hope.
Shahid then set out his priorities for the year ahead. They include addressing COVID-19 vaccine inequality. He intends to convene a special event either later this year or early next year to look at what further action needs to be taken on that issue. The environment will also continue to be a key focus, and Mr. Shahid says he'll hold an event in New York in October to target and exceed commitments under the Paris Agreement. And Shahid says he's going to push for gender equality. He intends to set an example by only participating in panels that are gender balanced. Now, following his speech, 9 countries, including China, the United States and the Russian Federation, is to determine who can represent member states at the UN, and one of their first tasks will be to decide who has the authority to speak for Afghanistan and Myanmar following political instability in those countries. Attention will now turn to the high-level general debate in which heads of states from around the world will address the General Assembly. That's due to begin next Tuesday. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
Well, last year, the General Assembly was conducted almost entirely virtually due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This year, however, leaders from over 80 countries are expected to speak in person about the challenges their countries are facing. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa has more insights about African countries' expectations.
The United Nations General Assembly 2021 opened amid strict pandemic rules. Participants are required to wear masks, while far fewer seats will be occupied in the General Assembly Hall. The requirements mean a section of leaders from the United Nations' 193 member states can once again meet in person for the annual Diplomatic Assembly. The General Assembly serves as a main policy-making body of the UN, deliberating complex world issues and challenges facing its members. The COVID-19 pandemic spread across the globe last year, proving challenging for several regions, and Africa is no exception. Vaccine inequality remains an area of concern as richer countries have secured massive doses for their populations while Africa lags behind. Only around 3% of Africa's population is fully vaccinated. Security concerns are also likely to dominate discussions at the meeting. The Sahel region and parts of West Africa and the Horn of Africa have suffered brutal attacks by militants.
There is a real danger that the current threat, especially from terror, and insurgent groups across the continent may threaten the viability of states as we know them. And so the continent is going to expect there's going to be a lot more focus on supporting both regional and internal mechanisms on the continent to ensure that that threat is eliminated.
Climate change is yet another important issue that cuts across the board, affecting all the member states. African countries have long pushed for a seat at the United Nations Security Council, but haven't been successful. Incoming United Nations General Assembly laid out the theme for this year's session, Building Resilience Through Hope, to recover from COVID-19, rebuild sustainability, respond to the needs of the planet, respect the rights of people, and revitalize the United Nations.
The COVID pandemic has changed the world. The world economics has changed. And so I think inaction is no longer an option on the critical and pertinent issues that are facing the world.
It is a tall order, one that comes at a crucial point in time. Bulkisanyabwa, CGTN.
Let's turn to the Tigray conflict now. The Ethiopian government says TPLF fighters have been found in the Amhara regional state carrying refugee ID cards issued by the United Nations Refugee Agency. The UN has denied claims that refugee camps in Sudan were being used.
Crossing the border with Sudan and attacking the
a day or so has admitted a decrease in the number of refugees that it could not account for.
The government also said TPLF forces have continued looting, raping and burning public and private properties. TPLF said such accusations are a result of fabricated information. Still, reports tell even a public school built by the world-famous elite Haile Gebrselassie was allegedly burned to the ground by the Tigray force. Haile says what happened is heartbreaking.
Of course, this has broken my heart. I faced such attacks against my hotels several times before. This attack, however, is uniquely disturbing to me. We've spent more than money here. These kids do not know anything about the war. They do not even know who's fighting with who. I'm especially referring to the small kids here. This is difficult to accept.
Some villagers from the Amhara regional state have also claimed members of TPLF have formally taken their belongings, leaving almost nothing behind for them to survive with.
They have taken literally everything, our clothing. The 10 chickens I had were even eaten by them. My neighbors too have faced the same agony.
They come into our villages only aiming to loot whatever they can lay their hands on. They leave immediately thereafter.
As the war continues in the north and with, of course, no tangible signs of it stopping, the international community, including the UN, are calling for the beginning of dialogue without preconditions to resolve the conflict. Until such moves are made, experts say the effects of the clash, especially on civilians, will only get worse. Group Data CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
To the coronavirus now, a tech transfer hub that aims to produce COVID-19 vaccines for Africa is facing an uphill task in its bid to replicate Moderna's mRNA shot. Talks with the US pharmaceutical company have not yielded results. The tech transfer hub in South Africa is backed by the World Health Organization and was set up in June. Cape Town-based Afrigen Biologics has been selected to produce the first doses. The aim is to give poorer nations the know-how to produce vaccines. A coordinator with the WHO's Initiative for Vaccine Research says Moderna's vaccine was chosen due to an abundance of public information and because the company has said it will not enforce patents. But COVID-19 vaccine makers have warned that non-authorized producers would compete for vital raw materials and production equipment. The case highlights the challenges the WHO faces in addressing glaring vaccine inequalities between rich and poor countries. Uganda has temporarily closed Nakutunya prison in its eastern city of Soroti after 34 inmates tested positive for COVID-19. The facility was previously turned into an isolation center where new inmates are managed before being taken to other jails, this in an effort to stop the spread of infections. Isabel Nakiria reports.
Nakatunya prison in the east of Uganda will remain closed for 2 weeks to allow disinfection. The Uganda Prison Service says 34 inmates that tested positive to the coronavirus have been moved to a hospital in Jinja. Uganda has designated 5 treatment centers for prisoners who test positive to COVID-19. The rest of the 116 prisoners from the Nakatunya prison have been transferred to other prisons. The facility was being used as a pre-jail center for new inmates awaiting transfer to main jails.
Since the inception of COVID, we created what we call isolation centers to keep the prisoners that are coming from the police cells, because police picks these people from the public. And as long as the public has COVID, then some of those people who are arrested actually come with COVID.
The Teso region where the Nakatunya prison is located has recently seen a rise in cases. The Health Ministry announced it's making an effort to restore hospitals in the east of the country with oxygen and ICU beds as the country prepares for a possible third wave. So far, over 1,700 prisoners in Ugandan prisons have tested positive to the coronavirus since March 2020. Civil society groups accuse the government of using excessive force while enforcing lockdown restrictions, leading to the arrest of hundreds of people, some of whom are later convicted.
This congestion is also being caused by our stubbornness. A number of people don't want to listen to the word curfew. Then they end up behind the bars just for curfew. So that's one of the things I think we need to address, especially sensitizing the community to avoid being incarcerated.
Activists argue detention centers should be decongested to control the spread of the coronavirus. Ugandan prisons have an official capacity of only 20,000 inmates, but there are currently more than 65,000 in jail. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
Your business news coming up next. Coming up, MTN gives Ugandans access to sell and buy stocks from their cell phones. And the South Sudanese government looks at ways to contain soaring inflation.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Business news now. MTN has launched Uganda's first mobile stocks trading platform. The shares trading service is in partnership with the Uganda Securities Exchange. The telecoms firm is the country's biggest, with a subscriber base of about 15 million people. Customers will be able to open securities accounts, buy and sell shares, as well as transfer cash to stockbrokers straight from their mobile phones. The Uganda Securities Exchange has about 38,000 investors. It hopes the new mobile trading platform will attract even more. In July, MTN paid $100 million to renew its operating license for 12 years. One of the conditions of that agreement was that the firm lists at least 20% of equity within 2 years. Fair Trade Africa hosted a stakeholders open forum in the Kenyan capital on Tuesday. The forum focused on ethical trade and emerging market opportunities for smallholder farmers and workers in East and Central Africa. CGTN's Najma Abdirazak attended the event and filed this report.
Better prices and fairer deal for farmers and workers. Key discussions here at the latest edition of Fair Trade Africa Forum in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi.
And market access has a direct impact to the social and economic well-being of our producers. In East Africa, we are currently producing and selling largely coffee, tea and flowers within the domestic and international markets. But beyond the East African markets, we're looking at exporting and opening intra-Africa trade with coffee, tea to other African countries as well as Pacific Asian countries. We have opportunities to sell more in Korea now, and also in China we're getting some very good markets. And so beyond that is to also look at other value chains like vegetables, avocado. Kenya is known for great sources of avocado. So again, supporting our producers to be able to move into other value chains so that then they're able to sell more on fair trade terms.
Under the theme Ethical Trade and Emerging Market Opportunities for Agricultural Products, producers, partner organizations and stakeholders at the event focused on improvement of value chains, trade relations and conditions, as well as new market opportunities for farmers and workers across Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi.
We have a number of value chains across the East African region. We start from Ethiopia, we have flowers, there we have coffee. Coffee is big in Ethiopia, but of course flowers as well. You come to Kenya, the mainstream supply of flowers. Of course we have tea, we have coffee, we have vegetables and fruits also in Kenya here. If you go across to Uganda, that is where you have the highest number of value chains. You have the smaller ones. We call them small because of the volumes that come in.
Fair Trade Africa is owned by its members, who are the African producer organizations certified against international fair trade standards, producing traditional export commodities. Currently, the non-profit organization represents over 1 million producers across 33 countries in Africa. Kenya is the leader in terms of workers in the fair trade domain, with 36% market share. Tea, coffee and flowers are Fair Trade Africa's core products, accounting for 89.66% of all certified producer organizations. Fair trade certification has particularly been instrumental in supporting Kenyan flour workers amid the current COVID-19 crisis. Flour firms have spent more than $500,000 in fair trade premium on food packages and hygiene items, benefiting roughly 17,000 people. And now as sales begin to recover, Producers like Valentine growers are looking to consumers and businesses to choose fair trade flowers.
Pandemic came. Fair trade came in to assist the workers by provision of some of the needy items like foodstuff. This one was given out of the normal premium that is normally given to the workers. So fair trade came in and it was able to disburse some amount which was used to buy foodstuffs for the workers. And also through the premium, we were able to support our workers by helping them, especially when they had to go home for some 2 or 3 months in groups. So we were able to help them to sustain themselves during that period when the market collapsed. But later on, when the market came back, we were able to continue. So through the premium, the workers were able to be assisted to be able to proceed with their lives as normal.
Fair Trade Africa estimates that as many as 90% of all flower workers across East Africa have somehow been affected by the pandemic through reduced pay, unpaid leave or job losses. The impact has been felt across Kenya, particularly where the flower sector employs over 150,000 people directly and an estimated 2 million indirectly. Najma Abdirizak, CGTN.
To Nigeria now, where controversy surrounds the collection of value-added tax, pitting the federal and state governments against each other. Two of the states that generate the highest VAT in the country have effected new laws that enable them to keep VAT revenue within their states. But the country's Federal Inland Revenue Service is challenging the action of these states. CGTN's Deji Badmus has the story.
Nigeria's Federal Inland Revenue Service has always been responsible for VAT collection in the country. Two of Nigeria's 36 states, Lagos and Rivers, contribute about 60% of the VAT collectibles. Their VAT goes to the federal purse, which is then shared among the 3 tiers of government monthly. But the two states say they are not getting enough and that they, rather than the FIRS, should be collecting and keeping their VAT. A federal high court judge agreed with them, and on the basis of that, they went on to quickly promulgate their own VAT law to collect and keep their tax.
It is an issue now because Nigeria is now looking inward. We now know that there's a lot of revenue in tax collection. That is one. Two, the Finance Act 2020 increased VAT from 5% to 7.5%. As of last year, what was generated from VAT contributed to 16.1% of the GDP. It has never happened before. It's scary. Everybody wants to know what exactly is in this VAT.
The FIRS has appealed against the court ruling. It insists it must retain the collection to avoid multiple taxation on businesses and for ease of collection.
Because there is a single tax authority handling VAT, it is easy to work out the input-output mechanism, and there is no issue of the business person being shortchanged. There's no issue of consumers having to pay VAT more than once. As of today, there's no single state government that controls any port in Nigeria, and which is why it becomes a lot easier for the FIRS, being a federal government institution, to administer VAT at the port.
Tax experts say if Lagos and Rivers states went ahead with their plan, it would create a lot of financial challenges for most states, and that businesses will be heavily impacted as well.
It's an unnecessary pressure on an economy where you depend heavily on the SME sector, both for survival, for employment and everything. At the end of the day, the people will suffer, small businesses will suffer, even the state themselves will make less taxes, because they also have a lot of issues with using consultants to collect, paying some exorbitant commissions, and then a lot of leakages in the media. So people will pay more, government will collect less, everybody will suffer. I don't see a winner in all of this other than the federal government.
The case has now gone to the Court of Appeal, which has asked both Lagos and Rivers states to stay action on the issue until it gives a ruling on it. So for now, the entire country waits for the Court of Appeal to decide on the matter. But there's every likelihood the case will ultimately have to be settled by the country's Supreme Court. Deji Badimasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
South Sudan's government says it's working on measures to contain spiraling inflation and promote production and investment. A decade after becoming the world's youngest nation, South Sudan has been rocked by instability and continued deterioration of living conditions. Patrick Oyet reports.
For many in South Sudan's capital, Juba, rising inflation is pushing prices of goods higher than they can reach. Most commodities in the market are imported. Truck drivers bringing commodities to South Sudan have been protesting over insecurity along major highways from neighboring countries. The strike has just been called off, but prices continue to rise.
The prices in the market are very high. My 1 month salary can only buy beans that when I cook, it's not even enough for the family for a day. Goods are very expensive. The South Sudan pound has gained against the US dollars, but nothing is cheap in the market.
We need to urge the government of South Sudan to make orders to all the traders to reduce the prices in the market by allowing police to move on the market to check all the food item and other item to reduce in the market.
Farmers have not been able to cultivate as a result of flooding and violence, and civil servants have not received their salaries for the past 3 months. The exchange rate between US dollars against the local currency remains unstable, and so are the prices in the market. South Sudan's government says it is doing everything it can to implement the 2018 peace agreement. It says lasting peace will promote investment and stabilize prices.
The security is number one. So you don't think about the investment if there is not security. And this is a message for our young people. If they need a decent life, they need their life to be changed, let us stop trouble. Let us stop thinking of war.
Authorities in the oil-rich country say they are working to clear the arrears of the civil servants, but for many here, the delay is diminishing their purchasing power. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
To China now, where August statistics show that industrial output rose 5.3% from a year ago. Fixed asset investment rose 8.9% in the first 8 months of the year. Property investment rose about 11% from January to August. The growth rate has been sliding since the beginning of this year as the government took measures to keep housing prices stable. Retail sales rose 2.5% in August. The Stats Authority says sporting, entertainment and cultural consumption continue to expand quickly, reflecting sustained momentum in China's consumption upgrading. Yang Shanshan breaks down the numbers.
Economic data for August shows China's high-tech manufacturing sector is growing faster. The trade volume is also growing, while unemployment for people aged 18 to 24 living in urban areas has started to drop. However, things like industrial production, consumption and fixed investment have slowed compared to previous months.
Generally speaking, in August, the national economy maintained a trend of recovery. However, the situation abroad continues to complicate things. Plus, at home, sporadic outbreaks of COVID-19 and natural disasters like floods have had an impact on the economy, and the foundation for recovery still needs to be consolidated.
Though China's inflation remains stable, production prices for industrial products went up by 9.5% year-on-year, with 0.5% faster in August than in July. This has raised some concerns among experts.
The increase in PPI has reflected on the coal, chemical and steel industries. The reason for this is an increase in demand but a tightening in supply. At the same time, international commodity prices may continue to maintain highs for short term, and their future is still uncertain. Therefore, China's PPI is still experiencing pressure, so we will monitor it closely.
China's stricter regulations on the after-school tutoring, property and internet industries have placed setbacks on the service industry. However, compared to July, service industry data has started to recover, and modern services like information transmission, software and information technology services have grown. At the press conference, Chinese officials still promise to open up the country's economy and welcome the foreign investment. They say at the same time, China will still continue to implement measures to boost domestic consumption and support the real economy. Yang Shen, CGTN, Beijing.
Time for a short break. Your sports news up next. Coming up, Cristiano Ronaldo's Manchester United fall to young boys in the UEFA Champions League.